She thought she was making a bold statement by ejecting the man in the Make America Great Again cap, hiding behind corporate policy. But the next day, that seemingly insignificant customer returned in a suit worth her annual salary and introduced himself. By the time she realized who he was, it was too late. Her career went up in flames faster than her pride. The morning at Stark Finance started like any other, a little dull, a little too routine. Jessica Kramer, the branch manager with a reputation for running a tight ship, was in her element. Her sharp heels clicked across the tiled floor as she handed out assignments to the staff. Everyone knew Jessica didn't mess around. If something wasn't done to her standards, you'd hear about it. Today seemed no different. That is, until he walked in. He wasn't flashy, but he grabbed attention. A man in his late 50s, dressed like he'd just stepped out of a garage sale, wore not jeans, a faded t-shirt, and of all things a bright red MAGA cap perched on his head. That hat wasn't just a hat, it was a conversation starter, or in Jessica's case, a conversation stopper. Her face tightened the second she saw him, her jaw setting like concrete. Jessica didn't like drama, but she wasn't afraid to start it when the moment called for it. And oh, this moment was begging for it. The man stepped up to the counter casually, looking around like he owned the place. He waited patiently for his turn, but his mere presence had already caused a shift in the room. Jessica could feel the tension brewing. A few employees exchanged uneasy glances, and even the customers seemed hyper, aware of him. But Jessica, she saw an opportunity. When his turn came, he walked confidently to her desk. "Good morning," he said with a polite smile. "I'd like to open a new account." Jessica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she gave him a slow, deliberate one, sober, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We're quite busy today," she finally said, her voice crisp and borderline dismissive. "You can always use our online services." The man blinked, surprised but still calm. "I prefer handling my business face-to-face," he said, his tone even. "I've been banking here for years, and this has never been an issue." Jessica leaned back in her chair, her hands folding neatly on the desk. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a faint flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Sir, we reserve the right to deny service if a customer's appearance or behavior could be considered offensive to others." There it was. She dropped the hammer. The man tilted his head slightly, his polite smile slipping. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a harder edge now. "Are you saying you're refusing to serve me because of my hat?" Jessica didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, her tone frosty. "It's bank policy." The room seemed to freeze. Employees tried to keep their heads down, but their ears were wide open. A couple of customers pretended not to look, but their curiosity was written all over their faces. The man, however, wasn't about to back down. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice rising just enough to make Jessica glance around nervously. "You're denying me service because you don't like what I'm wearing. That's called discrimination, you know." Jessica squared her shoulders, her professional facade unshaken. "We are well within our rights to refuse service if we believe it's necessary to maintain a comfortable environment for our customers." The man let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Wow, that's impressive. You managed to turn basic customer service into a power trip. Do you treat all your longtime clients like this, or am I just lucky?" Jessica's patience was wearing thin, but she kept her composure. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time to leave. If you don't, I'll have to involve security." At this, the man leaned slightly forward, his eyes narrowing. "You might want to think this through," he said quietly, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Because if you're about to kick me out, I guarantee it's not going to end the way you think." Jessica didn't waver. She gestured to the security guard standing by the door. "Alex, please escort this gentleman out." The guard hesitated, looking between Jessica and the man. He didn't seem thrilled about stepping into the middle of this. The man noticed and smirked. Smart guy, he muttered under his breath. Jessica's voice cut through the tension like a whip. Alex now. The guard sighed and approached the man. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man didn't move at first. He just stared at Jessica, his smirk fading into something more serious. Then, slowly, he stepped back. "All right," he said, his tone low and steady. "I'll leave, but you're making a mistake." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving the entire bank in a state of awkward silence. Jessica exhaled quietly, straightening her blouse. "Back to work, everyone," she said briskly, trying to regain control of the room. But the tension lingered, and the looks exchanged among her staff suggested this wasn't over not by a long shot. The man stood there, completely still, like he was mentally cataloging everything and everyone in the room. His calmness was unnerving. No yelling, no flustered gestures, just the kind of quiet tension that makes people uncomfortable without them knowing why. His gaze swept across the room, landing on each person as if he were silently taking names for later. A few customers awkwardly looked away, pretending to be interested in their phones or the ceiling. The employees weren't any better, shuffling papers or suddenly finding something very important to do on their screens. Jessica, however, didn't waver. She met his gaze with her usual ice-cold demeanor, arms crossed in silent authority. The air felt heavy now, like everyone was collectively holding their breath. Then his voice broke the silence, calm but firm. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, his tone carrying just enough weight to make it sound less like a question and more like a warning. Jessica arched an eyebrow, tilting her head slightly. "We don't have a choice, sir," she replied, gesturing sharply toward the security guard. "Alex, please escort this gentleman out." Alex, the bank's security guard, a tall, broad-shouldered guy who usually looked intimidating, seemed less confident today. His movements were hesitant, as if he were walking toward something he'd rather avoid. Clearing his throat, he stepped forward, standing a few feet from the man. "Sir," Alex began, his voice low and careful, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. We're trying to keep things smooth here." The man turned to face Alex, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "Smooth," he repeated, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I don't think you understand, Alex. The only reason this isn't smooth is because of her." He nodded in Jessica's direction without breaking eye contact. Jessica didn't flinch. "You're disrupting our business, sir," she said curtly. "We've been more than patient, but now it's time for you to go. If you have a complaint, you can address it through the proper channels." The man gave a short laugh, not of amusement, but of disbelief. "Proper channels," he said, shaking his head slightly. "I'm not sure your boss would agree with this little policy of yours." Jessica's eyes narrowed, but she didn't let her composure slip. "I am the acting authority here," she said, her voice steady and clipped. "My decision stands." Alex shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Jessica and the man. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he had a job to do. "Sir," he tried again, this time more assertively, "please don't make this harder than it has to be." The man's smirk disappeared, replaced by a steely look that seemed to cut right through Alex. After a moment he nodded slightly. "All right," he said, taking a deliberate step back. "I'll leave, but let me make system one thing clear." He continued, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "This is a mistake, a big one, and trust me, it's not going to end the way you think." The words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, making the room feel colder. A few customers froze mid-step, and even the tellers behind the counters stopped pretending to work. Jessica straightened her shoulders, keeping her expression neutral, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The man adjusted his hat, gave Alex a slight nod, and walked toward the exit. Just as he reached the door, he stopped, turned back, and met Jessica's gaze one last time. "You'll remember this moment," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of finality. "I guarantee it." With that, he pushed the door open and walked out into the midday sun, leaving the bank in a heavy, awkward silence. For a moment nobody moved, then Jessica cleared her throat, breaking the tension. "All right, back to work," she said, her voice sharp and commanding, but the authority in her tone didn't quite match the unease lingering in the air. The employees exchanged nervous glances, and even Alex looked like he wasn't entirely sure what had just happened. Jessica sat back at her desk, tapping her pen against the edge of her notebook. She wouldn't admit it, not even to herself, but something about the man's parting words unsettled her. Still, she pushed the thought aside. She had a branch to run, and as far as she was concerned, the problem had just walked out the door, or so she thought. The morning after the incident, Stark Finance was buzzing, but not in the usual way. The staff wasn't talking about numbers or clients. They were whispering about what had happened the day before. Every corner of the office was alive with hushed conversations. "Did you see his face when she told him to leave?" one teller murmured to another. "Yeah, but honestly, Jessica had a point." The second replied, "I mean, it's her call, right? Not everyone agreed, though. Some employees were visibly uneasy, as if yesterday's drama had cast a shadow over the office." Jessica Kramer, however, walked in like she always did, heels clicking, head held high, and her signature air of authority firmly in place. She acted as though yesterday's confrontation was nothing more than a minor bump in her otherwise flawless record. But the calm didn't last long. Around noon, just as the office settled into its usual rhythm, two men walked in. They were dressed in sharp suits that screamed power and money, the kind of attire that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. One of them approached Jessica's desk while the other lingered near the door, surveying the room like a hawk. "Miss Kramer," the man in front said, his voice polite but firm, "we'd like to have a word with you in private. Please follow me to the conference room." Jessica blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Of course," she replied, rising from her seat with an air of professionalism. Her mind raced as she followed the man down the hall. Was this about yesterday? Surely not. She had handled it by the book, or at least her version of the book. As she stepped into the conference room, her stomach dropped. Sitting at the head of the table, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, was the man she had kicked out of the bank the day before. Gone was the casual look and the MAGA hat. This man radiated authority, and the calm smile on his face made her realize just how deeply she had underestimated him. "Good afternoon, Miss Kramer," he said, his tone measured and composed. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is James Langston, and I own this bank." Jessica froze. For a moment it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You're the owner," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's correct," James replied, leaning back in his chair. "And yesterday I had the unfortunate experience of seeing firsthand how you choose to handle our clients." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but James held up a hand to stop her. "Please let me finish," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. "Your behavior was not just inappropriate, it was unacceptable. This bank prides itself on treating every client with respect, regardless of their personal beliefs or appearance. You didn't just fail to uphold that standard, you completely undermined it. Mr. Langston." Jessica began, her voice shaky. "I was simply trying to. I'm not interested in excuses." He interrupted, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "What I saw yesterday was not the behavior of someone fit to represent this institution. You demonstrated bias, poor judgment, and an inability to manage conflict professionally. As of this moment, your employment with Stark Finance is terminated." The words hit her like a freight train. Jessica's legs felt weak, but she managed to stay upright. "Terminated," she repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it less real. "Yes," James confirmed, rising from his chair. "You'll receive your final paycheck along with instructions on how to collect your personal belongings. I expect you to vacate the premises by the end of the day." Jessica didn't argue. What could she say? The man she had dismissed as just another difficult customer had turned out to be her ultimate downfall. She nodded stiffly, her face pale, and walked out of the conference room in a daze. Back at her desk, she gathered her things in silence. The staff, who had been sneaking glances in her direction all morning, now openly stared. Word spread quickly through the office, and by the time she walked out of the building for the last time, everyone knew what had happened. But the fallout didn't end there. By the next day, the story had made its way online. Several customers who had witnessed the incident posted about it, and the tale of the manager who kicked out her boss went viral. People debated fiercely in the comments. Some defended Jessica, saying she was just doing her job, while others called her behavior a prime example of why judgment and bias have no place in customer service. For Jessica, the damage was irreparable. Her name became synonymous with impulsive decision-making and poor leadership. Job offers dried up, and her once bright career took a nosedive. As for James Langston, he used the incident as a teaching moment for his staff, emphasizing the importance of treating every customer with dignity. The bank's reputation not only recovered but improved, as people admired how the owner had handled the situation with fairness and integrity. Jessica's downfall became a cautionary tale, a reminder that a single moment of poor judgment can have lasting consequences. What do you think? How would you have handled the situation if you were in his place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced anything similar in your own life? Don't forget to like and share if this story resonated with you.